He didn't care how loving, caring and kind Jodie Willsher was. This evil madman was on a mission of murder and retribution, hell-bent on getting revenge for a cause he had created in his own head. He had tracked her, stalked her to her workplace in Aldi, and now he laid in wait, waiting for the perfect time to pounce and enact his devious plan. And when he did, he caused a scene of carnage, a moment in time that the Aldi shoppers who witnessed the barbaric butchery of that day will never be able to scrub from their minds. This is the devastatingly brutal murder of Jodie Willsher, who was unknowingly tracked, stalked and murdered whilst in the middle of her shift in an Aldi supermarket in the small town of Skipton, North Yorkshire. Hello and welcome to the Diary of Madmen and Monsters, where we talk about the mad men, women and monsters that inhabit our society, covering well-known and not so well-known cases across the UK and beyond. And if you run on caffeine, true crime and the odd glass of good wine, you're in the right place and you're going to fit in well. Now, let's get ready because it's time for more true crime. On December 21st, 4 days before Christmas 2017, shoppers at a busy Aldi supermarket in the quiet town of Skipton were going about their festive errands. Unbeknownst to anyone, a nightmare was about to unfold in aisle 5. In the span of mere minutes, holiday cheer would turn to horror. Customers would tackle a knife-wielding attacker to the floor as panicked screams echoed through the store, and a young mother, beloved by her family and community, would lie fatally wounded on the ground. What drove this broad daylight public execution? The truth, when it came out, left an entire community in shock. This was no random act of violence at all, but a twisted tale of obsession and revenge that struck at the heart of one family. The victim in this heinous crime was Jodie Willsher, a 30-year-old wife and mother known for her warmth and kindness. Jodie was the kind of person who lit up a room. In the North Yorkshire town of Skipton, everyone seemed to know her or had been through her checkout line at Aldi and been greeted with her friendly smile. She lived in Skipton with her husband Malcolm and their young daughter Megan, who was the absolute light of Jodie's life. Jodie's family described her as lovely and warm, the sort of person who always had a smile on her face and a positive word for others. Friends said she was full of life and full of fun, a devoted mother, a caring daughter to her mum Nicole, and a loving wife to Malcolm. She enjoyed simple pleasures, spending time with family, hosting friends and helping others. By Christmas time 2017, Jodie and Malcolm had been married 7 years. They were very much in love. A former school friend would recall that Jodie and Malcolm were the perfect relationship, so in love with each other. Together, they were raising little Megan, who at only 4 years old thought her mummy hung the moon. Jodie's world revolved around her family and her work at Aldi, where she was a treasured colleague. As the holiday approached, Jodie was happily juggling shifts at the store and preparations for a family trip to Disneyland that they'd excitedly planned for Boxing Day. Life was good, and Christmas was supposed to be a joyous time. No one, least of all Jodie, imagined the danger that was lurking just out of sight. On December 21st, 2017, Jodie woke up ready for a busy day. It was the final Thursday before Christmas, typically one of the craziest shopping days of the year. She headed into work at the Aldi supermarket on Keighley Road in Skipton, where she'd been employed since the store opened 2 years earlier. The atmosphere in town was festive and bustling. That afternoon, the aisles were crowded with last-minute shoppers grabbing turkeys, stuffing and gifts. Jodie, always helpful, spent her day assisting customers with that trademark smile and chatting with regulars about their holiday plans. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But somewhere among those shoppers, blending in with the crowd, was a man watching Jodie's every move. He wasn't there to buy groceries or presents. He was there to hunt. This man was carrying a concealed hunting knife and harbouring a burning resentment. As Jodie cheerfully tended to her work, tidying up stock and ringing up purchases at the till, the man drew closer. As Jodie worked diligently, she didn't notice the devil approaching. But as he came closer, she turned towards him and in her usual friendly style flashed him a smile as to welcome him. But little did she know, the man that stood before her was not another Christmas shopper. He was there to inflict pain and devastation. And so as she turned and offered a warm reception, she had no way of knowing that this casual kindness would be the final gesture of her life. Without warning, the man lunged at Jodie with a knife. The attack was as sudden as it was savage. In the middle of the afternoon rush, screams erupted from aisle 5. Shoppers stood frozen for a split second, processing the unthinkable sight before them. Jodie, their lovely cashier and friend, was being stabbed again and again by a crazed assailant. He struck with frenzied force, the steel blade plunging into Jodie's chest and torso repeatedly. Jodie didn't even have time to cry out before she collapsed under the continuing onslaught. As terrified customers began shouting and scrambling away, some found the courage to act. An older gentleman in his 60s wearing a flat cap, there with his wife to do their shopping, ran toward the danger. This unnamed customer was the first to reach the knifeman, grabbing hold of his arm in an attempt to stop the attack. The assailant, knife in hand, was dragged off balance. Within seconds, other shoppers and Aldi staff joined the struggle. It was a chaotic and heroic melee, several people versus one violent attacker. Groceries scattered across the floor as they grappled. The man with the knife continued stabbing even as Jodie lay bleeding on the ground, but the bystanders tackled him with all their might. He was a tall, heavy-set figure, thrashing angrily, but together the group managed to wrestle him down. One employee later described how they piled on top of the attacker to pin his arms. Finally, the knife clattered to the floor, pried from his grasp. The scene in Skipton Aldi was now one of horror mixed with bravery. A few good Samaritans restrained the assailant, holding him down with sheer adrenaline-fueled strength, while others turned their attention to Jodie. Shoppers were yelling for first aid and "call an ambulance." Over the store's loudspeaker, someone had already dialed 999 and was urgently summoning medical help and police. A couple of Jodie's co-workers knelt beside her, desperately trying to staunch the bleeding with whatever they could find. But it was immediately clear that Jodie's injuries were catastrophic. She had been stabbed 11 times in vital areas: her chest, abdomen, head and even her neck. Blood was pooling on the white tile floor. Jodie was unconscious, barely clinging to life. Within about 5 minutes, the first police officers burst through the entrance of the Aldi. They raced to the aisle to find a group of civilians still pinning the assailant face down. Those citizens had risked their own lives in doing so, not knowing if the man had more weapons, later finding out that he did indeed have an axe hidden in his jacket. The officers shouted for the bystanders to stand back. They moved in with tasers drawn, though ultimately the suspect was already subdued. The police handcuffed the attacker and took him into custody right there in the aisle. He did not put up any further fight. Bystanders later recalled that once disarmed, the man had become eerily calm and silent. At the same time, paramedics and an air ambulance crew arrived and fought to save Jodie's life on the supermarket floor. Shoppers, including parents with young children, were ushered out of the store, many in tears or shock at what they had just witnessed. As medics worked frantically, screens and jackets were held up to give Jodie some privacy in her final moments. Despite every effort, nothing could be done. Jodie Willsher succumbed to her injuries at the scene. A mere quarter of an hour earlier, she had been a healthy, happy woman going about her day. Now, she was gone, brutally taken in front of dozens of horrified onlookers. News of the tragedy spread quickly through Skipton. In a small town, word of such an event is almost incomprehensible. That afternoon, as police sealed off the store with crime scene tape, a crowd of worried residents gathered at the perimeter. Many feared it might have been a terrorist attack or a deranged stranger on a rampage. But as detectives began their work, the truth started to emerge and shocked everyone. The man under arrest was Neville John Hoard, a 44-year-old plumber from Bradford, and he was not a stranger to Jodie at all. In fact, Neville Horde had been romantically involved with Jodie's family. He was the ex-partner of Jodie's own mother, Nicole Dinsdale. This revelation hit those who knew Jodie like a second shockwave. Horde had once been welcomed to some degree into Jodie's family circle through her mum. Now, he had repaid that kindness with unspeakable violence. That night, while the Willsher family's world lay in tatters, Neville Horde sat in a police interrogation room. Investigators soon learned that Horde's rage towards Jodie had been festering for months. The backstory unfolded like a dark and twisted puzzle. Horde had dated Nicole Dinsdale, Jodie's mum, for some time, but their relationship had soured. In September 2017, Nicole broke things off with him. Horde did not take the breakup well. He became fixated on the idea that it was Jodie who had convinced her mother to end the relationship. Perhaps Jodie had seen red flags in Horde, controlling behaviour, temper issues, and encouraged her mum to leave him. If so, Jodie was right, but it put her squarely in Horde's crosshairs. His anger simmered and finally boiled over on November 25th, 2017. On that day, Horde attacked Nicole Dinsdale in her own home. We don't know all the details of that assault, but Nicole survived and went to tell the police. Horde was arrested for grievous bodily harm against her. Critically though, he was released on bail as the case proceeded. Nicole, terrified, told police that Horde had even threatened to kill her daughter Jodie during that incident. With hindsight, one can sense the tragic pattern. Nicole tried to protect her daughter by getting away from this man. But now, Horde was turning his violent obsession toward Jodie herself. During the investigation into Neville Horde, police uncovered a history of evil and abuse, with ex-partners of his coming forward to describe how he had been abusive, controlling and threatening during their previous relationships. The picture they were beginning to build of Horde was one of an evil, jealous, insecure monster who manipulated and lied his way through life, exacting out abusive control if he couldn't get his way by other means. In early December, while free on bail after the assault on Jodie's mother, Neville Horde set about quietly planning an elaborate act of vengeance. He was methodical. He placed a GPS tracking device under Jodie's car so he could monitor her movements in real time without her knowing. He spent hours online researching the Aldi store's busiest hours and even Googling how to buy a gun, apparently considering a firearm to carry out his vendetta. He ended up arming himself with readily available weapons. He bought at least 2 large knives, as well as an axe and a crossbow. The crossbow he stored in his car boot along with 50 steel bolts, essentially ammunition for a deadly secondary weapon. He also stocked his vehicle with a canister of fuel and plastic zip ties, hinting at further sinister intentions, perhaps to start a fire or to restrain someone, maybe Nicole if his plan extended beyond Jodie. Neville Horde was effectively assembling a murder kit, and crucially, he knew exactly where to find Jodie, at her workplace in the lead up to Christmas. All of this came out in the police investigation in the weeks after the murder. Horde himself, once in custody, confessed quite openly. In a chilling admission to detectives, he said he had gone to the Aldi that day specifically to kill Jodie Willsher. He even seemed to suggest that her friendly smile towards him as he approached might have triggered his final resolve to carry out the stabbing. It's a disturbing glimpse into the mind of a killer. To Horde, that innocent smile was interpreted as some kind of taunt or simply ignited the twisted grievance he'd been nursing. From behind bars, Neville Horde was charged with Jodie's murder the very next day, on December 22nd. When this was announced, the shock in Skipton was palpable. Jodie's husband, Malcolm, utterly heartbroken, released a statement to let the world know just who Jodie was. She was amazing, beautiful and a lovely person, Malcolm wrote. She was a doting mother and a loving wife, lovely and warm and always had a smile on her face. Reading his words, people across the UK were moved by the portrait of this young mother taken so cruelly. At the Aldi store's entrance, mourners created a makeshift memorial, heaping bouquets of flowers, stuffed animals and condolence cards. One card captured the community's grief. Jodie, no words can explain how much you are going to be missed. You were truly one in a million. Strangers and friends alike came to pay respects, some just standing and crying at the sight. Skipton's mate spoke on local radio saying, "The whole town is in shock and grieving. Christmas this year will be an ordeal for many residents." Indeed, an air of sorrow hung over the town during what should have been a festive time. Hoard's legal case moved quickly. On December 23, 2017, just 2 days after the murder, he was brought to a preliminary court hearing. In that brief appearance, Hoard was remanded to custody. There was never any question of bail given the severity of the crime. Over the next few weeks, as the Willsher family prepared for Jodie's funeral, the justice process marched on. The funeral itself took place on January 10, 2018, and it was both devastating and strangely beautiful. Hundreds of people turned out to celebrate Jodie's life. In accordance with the family's request, nearly everyone wore something pink, Jodie's favourite colour, to honour her vibrant spirit. Inside the church, there wasn't an empty seat. Malcolm, grief-stricken but composed, helped carry his wife's coffin, while little Megan followed behind, clutching a pink flower and accompanied by close family. There wasn't a dry eye as the vicar described Jodie's joyous, loving nature. It was as if the entire community was wrapping its arms around Jodie's family, determined to support them through the dark days ahead. Meanwhile, Neville Hoard was awaiting trial. Initially, he offered no plea. There was speculation he might attempt an insanity defence or force a full trial. But by March 2018, that changed. Whether motivated by overwhelming evidence, a guilty conscience, or a deal by his lawyers, Hoard finally pled guilty to murder on March 15, 2018, the very day his trial was set to begin. By admitting his crime, he spared Jodie's family the ordeal of a trial and effectively sealed his own fate. The sentencing hearing that followed revealed the full horror of what Hoard had done. Bradford Crown Court was packed that day with Jodie's family and the media. The prosecutor laid out Hoard's calculated plan step by step, the previous relationship with Nicole Dinsdale, Jodie's mother, the assault charge and the evil threats. Then, the prosecution spoke in detail about how Hoard had tracked Jodie down using the tracker planted on her car, figuring out her movement so he could find the perfect time to strike. They then described the lead up to the crime and the crime itself, how Hoard had driven to Jodie's place of work knowing she was there, parked up and then visited a McDonald's next door and sat with a coffee and some food to compose himself before walking back to his car, picking up his axe, placing it in his pants alongside his knife and making his way inside the store to commit his heinous act. They even mentioned the horrific injuries Jodie had sustained. She had been stabbed 11 times and slashed 5 times, all out of spite and revenge. There was even testimony from an ex-girlfriend of Hoard's who said that Hoard threatened to kill her and her young son if she left him, saying he told her, "I'll chop the pair of you up and bury you on the moors." When it was their turn to speak, Jodie's loved ones held nothing back about the pain he had caused. Jodie's uncle addressed the court, saying, "Our beautiful girl has gone to heaven without mercy or hesitation. Our hearts will never heal from the sadness we feel." Malcolm's victim impact statement was perhaps the most poignant. He talked about the unbreakable bond between Jodie and Megan, how mother and daughter were inseparable best friends. He talked about Christmas presents that would remain forever unopened, and a family trip to Disneyland that would never happen. And he shared how at just 5 years old, little Megan was angry and confused, even telling her dad she hated him for not being able to bring mummy back. "I have to explain it to Megan, who then says to me, 'I hate you, Daddy, for not bringing mummy back. You're not trying hard enough.' She then says, 'Daddy, can't I have a brother or sister anymore? Or won't mummy ever be a granny now?' How do you deal with that?" Mr. Willsher added, "I'm so scared he'll get out and do something to Megan." At this, many in the courtroom openly wept, and even some officials were seen wiping their eyes. Judge Jonathan Durham Hall, QC, then delivered a searing condemnation of Neville Hoard's actions. Looking directly at the impassive defendant, the judge said, "You, Neville Hoard, are a monster, truly and horribly rotten to the core." He went on, "You chose a time and a place to, in effect, execute, to kill, to murder. This was in every sense an act of pure evil. You sentenced Jodie in your mind to death and carried out that sentence without mercy. The judge highlighted how Horde had deliberately carried out the killing in a public heinous way to cause the maximum pain, horror, shock and trauma to everyone who loved Jodie, as well as to the random bystanders. In a particularly striking moment, Judge Hall addressed the fear Malcolm had voiced, the fear that Horde might one day get out and hurt their daughter. The judge spoke firmly, assuring the family that Horde would be locked away for a very long time. He then pronounced the sentence, life in prison with a minimum of 30 years to be served before any possibility of release. 30 years was effectively a whole generation. It meant Horde would be an elderly man in his mid-70s at the very earliest chance of parole in 2048, and the judge strongly doubted Horde would ever be deemed safe to release at all. As the sentence was read, Horde reportedly showed little emotion. Jodie's family, while relieved that justice was done, wept quietly. No sentence could bring Jodie back, but at least the monster, as the judge rightly called him, was removed from society. For a moment it seemed the case was closed. Neville Horde had been publicly unmasked as a remorseless killer driven by a petty grudge. He would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. In the months after, Jodie's family attempted to pick up the pieces. There were touching gestures in Skipton to ensure Jodie's memory lived on. Pink balloons were released on the anniversary of her death. A charity fund run was organised to raise money for victims' support services, and a bench in the town park was dedicated in her name. Megan, only a little girl, had to start school without her mum there to hold her hand, but the community and extended family stepped in lovingly. Skipton essentially adopted Megan and Malcolm, making sure they were never alone for the holidays or birthdays. Jodie's mum, Nicole, despite her own immense grief and guilt, after all the murderer had once been her partner, bravely campaigned to raise awareness about domestic violence red flags. She spoke about how Horde had tried to isolate her from Jodie and control her life, urging others in similar situations to seek help before things escalate. One lingering footnote to the case came in October 2018. Neville Horde's lawyers appealed his sentence, arguing that a 30-year minimum term was too harsh since he pleaded guilty. To the dismay of many, the Court of Appeal did agree to reduce the minimum term from 30 years to 27 years. It was a relatively minor reduction, 3 years, but for Jodie's family it felt like an insult to her memory. The appeal judges carefully noted that the crime was heinous and warranted a severe punishment, but they trimmed the sentence on a technical point, feeling the original judge started slightly high. So, Neville Horde's earliest possible release was adjusted to the year 2045 instead of 2048. When this decision was announced, Malcolm Willsher responded that no number could truly reflect the value of Jodie's life, and that in his heart he had already given Horde a life sentence of his own. The family would never forgive him, and Jodie's absence was an eternal punishment for them. To this day, the story of Jodie Willsher stands as a heartbreaking example of how domestic violence and obsession can lead to unimaginable tragedy. A place as ordinary and safe as a supermarket in the middle of the afternoon became the scene of a nightmare. Yet, amid the horror, there were also heroes, the everyday people who stepped up to protect others, the witnesses who later testified so that justice could be served, and the community that refused to let Jodie be forgotten. Jodie's daughter Megan is now a few years older, and she's surrounded by love, hearing countless stories of how wonderful her mum was. Every Christmas, Skipton remembers the young mother taken from them far too soon. In the words of one of her cousins, "Be the brightest star in the sky and sleep tight." Jodie Willsher's light continues to shine in the memories of all who knew her, even as they hope that lessons learnt from her case will prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. At this point, I just wanted to offer my deepest condolences to all of the victims' friends and family. May Jodie rest in peace. And there you have it, a heinous murder committed by an evil monster that ripped a family and town apart. And if you took something from this case, you might also like to watch the video on screen now, where I cover 8 of the most evil murderers who were jailed for their crimes in November 2025. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one when it'll once again be time for more true crime.